This will be the most comprehensive and only aiming guide that you will ever need as a competitive Fortnite player. I highly recommend you watch this entire video so you can have a proper understanding of how to truly improve your aim. We'll be discussing a lot today, so be sure you have a notepad available and ready to take some notes. Without further ado, let's get into it. Here's everything we'll be covering. Each of these are going to be important factors when you're trying to master the fundamental of aiming. In order to do that, firstly we must cover what actually is aim. Aim is simply just the concept of moving your mouse from one place to another, which corresponds to the crosshair placement on your monitor. Depending on your sensitivity and DPI, it will move differently. Now that we can comprehend what aim actually is, we need to understand what is an aim trainer and what do they do. A lot of people have the common misconception that aim trainers aren't actually that good, or that they don't work, which obviously they do work. You're just not using them properly. Using an aim trainer properly and efficiently is the best and fastest way to get good aim. However, technically speaking, you don't need an aim trainer to get good aim. You can get it without an aim trainer just by playing Fortnite and understanding how to aim properly and applying the fundamentals. But it will take you much longer, as aim trainers are great at isolating specific aspects and weaknesses of your aim. Now that we know what an aim trainer is, we need to cover DPI, or dots per inch. This is how many dots you move per inch of movement to your mouse sensor. On most screens, you're going to have an RGB value. That creates the light on your screen. Those are pixels. There are 3 dots per pixel. This is pretty easy to understand. 1 dot for red, 1 dot for blue, and 1 dot for green. Together, these make 1 pixel. So your DPI is the amount of dots you're going to move per inch of mouse movement. The most common DPI values you'll encounter are 400, 800, and 1600. Obviously though, there are outliers with higher or lower DPIs, such as 3200, 6400, etc. However, higher DPIs are going to be smoother than the lower values, so I suggest just picking a DPI and testing it. Now that we have an understanding of DPI, we need to comprehend the differences between wrist and arm aiming and which one you should be using for gaming. This is actually a trick question. The answer is neither. Efficient aim is going to require both. For example, if you play on a low sensitivity, then obviously you're going to be using your arm a lot more for larger movements and having a wider range of motion. But you're still going to be using your wrist for micro movements. So really, you should adapt a hybrid style. Your arm is going to be much better for bigger movements that require a large range of motion, where your wrist is going to be much better for smaller movements and smaller ranges of motion, as your wrist is going to be much more precise. Now that we know you shouldn't just be relying on your arm, or just your wrist when you're aiming, now we need to understand the different types of grips that you can be using, and which one is going to be most optimal for gaming. So first we have the palm grip. This is going to be the most common type of grip you'll see, as it's the most comfortable on your hand. Basically, you're just placing your entire palm on your mouse and laying both your index and middle fingers on the mouse buttons. The advantages to this grip are you have a lot of control over the mouse due to having multiple points of contact. The only issue with this, though, is that you don't really have any range of motion in your fingertips. That leads us to the fingertip grip. With the fingertip grip, only your fingertips are actually touching the mouse. Your palm does not touch, as you can see with the picture on screen. The only issue with this grip is the lack of control during large motions, or if you're flicking and target switching a lot. You're going to lose control of your mouse, and your grip will deteriorate as you play, causing you to have to readjust your grip. Now, for the final grip. This is the best grip in my opinion, the claw grip. As you can see from the picture on screen, this is basically a combination of both the palm grip and the fingertip grip, with the top part of your palm floating just above your mouse, and your fingers curling like a claw. This gives you plenty of fingertip control, while also giving you multiple points of contact on the mouse. If you haven't already adapted an aiming style with a specific grip, I would recommend that you try claw, as it gives you all the pros of both the palm and fingertip grips, while not having as many cons. So statistically, it is the most efficient grip. The next thing we have to cover isn't actually a fundamental of aiming, but it's actually a piece of hardware / equipment, which is mouse pads. There's soft pads and hard pads. Soft pads are going to be your typical fabric style mouse pads or cloth pads, just your typical mouse pad. It's easy to find really big soft pads for a relatively decent price, not requiring you to break the bank for a good quality pad. Hard pads are typically going to be your metal pads, glass pads, and things like that. They're not squishy, flexible, or anything like that. With that comes less friction, but it depends on the material. The only disadvantage to hard pads is they will wear out your mouse skates faster, whereas the disadvantage to a soft pad is the material will wear out faster. Obviously, this isn't going to wear out over the span of a week or a month, but over time it will eventually start to wear and you'll have to buy another pad. The next thing we have to cover is probably something you actually don't think about that much, which is your sitting position. Typically speaking, the most optimal posture and sitting position when training your aim will be sitting up straight with your back flat against your chair, feet flat on the floor in front of you, arms on your desk as much as possible, with your elbow hanging off just a bit so you have a nice anchor point on the edge of your desk. Good posture is always going to be important, so consider that when you find a place to sit, and you need to maintain consistency with your sitting position. This is something that most people tend to ignore, but the way you sit needs to be consistent. You should be able to consistently get into the optimal sitting position within 10 seconds of sitting down at your desk, and be able to replicate that every single time you're either training your aim or playing in a tournament. Next thing we need to discuss is how to track your progress for improvement. A great way that I like to track my personal progress is by benchmarking my scores every Monday and writing these scores down on a Notion page. This allows me to keep all of my scores cleanly organized and very easy to notice where improvements have been made. I like to note down the score achieved each run, the accuracy on the scenario, and the average score over 5 rounds on each scenario. You should be setting goals with your score, both big and small goals. For example, big goal, top 100 on 3 reactive tracking scenarios, and a small goal could be increase your accuracy by 5% on a given reactive tracking scenario while maintaining similar speed to your current score. Now that we've covered all of the basic fundamentals of aiming, we're at the part where we actually improve our aim. There's 3 main aiming categories: click timing, target switching, and tracking. Each of those have 2 subcategories. For clicking, it's going to be static clicking and dynamic clicking. For target switching, it's speed clicking and evasive switching. And for tracking, it's smooth tracking and reactive tracking. So let's dive into clicking. Static clicking is basically just exactly what it sounds like: static targets on a wall. The point of static clicking is to test your raw aiming ability. Things like tempo, your speed, precision, accuracy, and other things like that. Also, your ability to micro adjust. For example, say I hit a target and want to flick up to another target, but I land here, just missing the target. Your ability to micro adjust back onto the target is crucial, and is basically what good click timing actually is. The way you want to properly do a click timing scenario is by taking a Bard pill. If you're not familiar with this, Bardoz is an extremely good static player, basically at the top of every popular static scenario. He's got a specific way of playing static scenarios, and he likes to call it the Bard pill. The Bard pill has 4 things that you need to do in static. The first, learn aiming like you would a musical instrument. Master the technique slowly at first. What does that mean though? For example, let's say your aim is terrible and you're just starting out. You want to take it very slowly. Learn the technique first, learn and understand fundamentally why you do it this way and why it works, etc. Second, flick fast, but take your time on the correction. Here, your goal is to build your stopping power, which is one of the most important things in aiming. If you often find yourself over-flicking, then you have bad stopping power. Good stopping power will allow you to flick precisely from one target to another with very little micro-adjusting required. The way you're going to get good stopping power is by going into a static scenario and flick as hard and as fast as you can without being shaky. We want nice flicks that are landing on target as precisely as possible. If you're not landing on target, immediately micro-adjust back onto the target. Your goal here is to just build up your stopping power. However, when you're playing these scenarios, avoid playing very floaty. You will never be aiming like this in an actual game. This will make your practice ineffective. You need to be snapping from target to target, which will be much more similar to how you would be aiming in a real game. The third part of the Bard pill, Restart if you miss in the first 10 seconds. This is relatively simple to understand. If you miss a target in the first 10 seconds, restart the scenario. This helps build in your mind that missing targets is bad, and we want the reward of finishing the scenario. When the scenario finishes, you get a dopamine hit. The final and fourth part of the Bard Pill is restart on the fourth miss. Again, this is relatively simple to understand. If you don't miss a target in the first 10 seconds, now you can only miss 4 shots the rest of the scenario. It doesn't matter if you get down to 2 seconds left. If you miss that 4th shot, you have to restart. Again, this will train your brain to remember that missing targets is bad. And whenever you complete the scenario, you're going to get that big dopamine hit. And that's the TLDR of the Bard Pill. Next, let's dive into dynamic clicking. Dynamic clicking is much harder than static and requires a different, unique skill set as there's a lot more going on. The biggest difference between static and dynamic is the targets will be moving here. You're technically going to be playing this the same way as static. There's just a little bit of tracking involved here and reading the map. You're not only paying attention to one individual bot. You have to be able to be aware of what the other bots on the map are doing. Otherwise, you'll hit one bot, then try to flick to the next, and miss because you're shooting where that bot was just a second ago. This will slow you down a lot, and this is actually very realistic to an actual game scenario. The chances that you will be able to hit one opponent and flick to the next opponent, and he's in this exact same place as he was 5 seconds ago, is very slim to none. Chances are, he is moved. So your ability to go for one target while also paying attention to other targets around you is very important. One of the most common things you'll see in dynamic scenarios is that you are relying on tracking a lot more than actually flicking to a target. You should be flicking and then microing onto the target, not just tracking it and trying to flick ahead of where the target is going to be. This goes back to static. You're going to need stopping power here. However, tracking isn't entirely bad here. You're actually going to need it just a bit since these targets are moving. However, you should only be tracking when you micro onto the target. This is going to be a really important concept to pick up on, and if you can get it early, you're going to see massive improvements very quickly. Now, the next thing we have to cover is target switching. We're going to start this off with speed switching. Basically, with target switching, you're going to hit one target and switch to the next one by flicking. So an important aspect of target switching is going to be your stopping power, yet again. We want good stopping power in these scenarios so you can quickly flick from one target to the other without having to micro-adjust too much. The main purpose of target switching is typically for games with a low time to kill, like most arena shooters, in general where there's multiple targets on screen. Typically these games are going to require more target switching. However, this is still a part of your aim that you're going to need in Fortnite. Essentially, good target switching is just your ability to have wider angle flicks, whereas with click timing, it's much more precise, smaller angle flicks. With target switching, you want to be avoiding micro movements as much as possible. They aren't necessarily bad, but it will slow you down a lot, where a big proponent of target switching is your speed. You want to be fast. Another large component of target switching is going to be accuracy. The main purpose of these target switching scenarios is getting you more comfortable over wider angles and big flicks. We want to get used to these and comfortable in this wide range of motion. A big reason for that is we want to eliminate as much overflick and underflick as possible. These will hurt your accuracy and kill your tempo and speed, so target switching scenarios are very good at helping eliminate that. Another thing with target switching scenarios, you want to be holding down left click the entire time. If you're letting go, you're going to have a lot of downtime after flicking, so your damage to uptime is much lower. This is something you will have to get used to as it feels different than flicking without holding down left click, but you will adapt relatively quickly. Another important aspect of target switching is being able to read the room. This is very similar to dynamic clicking, and very important as this translates heavily to in-game. Basically, all you're doing is practicing how you would in static. You flick, micro-adjust, and you're done. Now that we understand speed switching, we need to cover evasive switching. Now, what's the difference between speed switching and evasive switching? Evasive switching is a little bit more about accuracy and speed, because the targets are going to be moving. Same difference between static and dynamic clicking. Again, you're going to play this the same as the static scenario, focusing heavily on stopping power when flicking from target to target and micro-adjusting when needed. As you can see, this is pretty simple. It's basically just the same technique as you use in static. There's just different aspects required in each. Now that we understand target switching, we need to dive into tracking. We're going to start that off with smooth tracking. The first problem people have when tracking is trying to over-predict the targets. If you do that, you're doing too much. Just look at how the target is moving and smoothly track it. So the main technique for smooth tracking is going to be watching how the bot is moving and simply tracking that. Do not try and over-predict. As soon as you do that, you're going to stop thinking about the current track of the bot. We're not just constantly getting ready for it and trying to be reactive. We want to be smooth. But it's important to remember that when changing directions, you still need to be maintaining smoothness so you don't overflick the bot. When training smoothness, you need to keep a very neutral mouse grip. Not too tight, not too loose, not tensing, etc. Just keep a very neutral style grip. If you can't find your neutral grip, just think how hard you're gripping the mouse when you're just browsing the internet. This will be your neutral grip. Also, remember, when we're tracking, we're not looking at the crosshair. We're keeping our attention on the bot. We want to keep our attention of the bot in the center of our screen. Because what's in the center of our screen? The crosshair. This is why we need to keep our focus on the bot at all times. Our crosshair will line up with where the bot is. Now finally, with tracking, we need to cover reactive tracking. This is, in my opinion, the hardest type of aim. I don't really think anything comes close to reactive tracking. If you have very good reactive tracking skill, you can get good at everything, because reactive tracking requires you to be good at everything. This makes it very important that you learn the proper technique to actually apply it. With reactive tracking, you have to remember you don't react to every single movement the bot makes. You're only tracking the bot's big and major movements. If you're reacting to every single move the bot makes, your aim will be very out of control and very jittery. Our main goal here is to eliminate large, jittery flicks. We want smooth, nice tracking only, reacting to the bot's major movements. A lot of people are going to waste a lot of movement in these scenarios. This is what you want to try and avoid. You want to keep the downtime as low as possible, and be very resourceful with your movement, allowing you to have as much uptime as possible. Another big proponent with reactive tracking is over-flicking. If you see this as an issue, deliberately underflick, that way you only have to micro-adjust. Now, let's dive into how long you should be training your aim. Personally, I like to train my aim for roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. However, most people may not have this amount of time to dedicate only to their aim. I would suggest, though, that you aim for at least 45 minutes of good, focused practice for your aim each day. This will allow you to train numerous different scenarios for each of the aiming subcategories that we just talked about. Now, how intensely should we be practicing? To determine this, we can reference the Yerkes-Dodson law, which states that there is a relationship between performance and arousal. Increased arousal can help improve performance up to a certain point. At the point when arousal becomes excessive, performance diminishes. So we can apply this to training our aim by saying, if the level of intensity is too hard, our training is ineffective. If it's too easy, our training is ineffective. So we want something that's in the middle, that challenges us, but we're good enough to do decent, maybe not great, but well enough to hold our attention. That's the sweet spot we want to be in. For the final thing we're going to cover today, how to improve at a faster rate. The biggest thing when you want to improve quickly is simply just being focused on the task. For example, let's say I'm training my reactive tracking. I need to be focusing specifically on my weaknesses. To do that, first I need to find out what my biggest weakness is with reactive tracking. Let's use an example and say I try to predict where the bot is going to change directions, and it causes me to overflick or have very jittery aim. The next time I do a reactive tracking scenario, I would apply my focus to deliberately make sure I'm not trying to predict where the bot is going to move, and instead just follow the motion of the bot. Once I have this weakness fixed, I would then reevaluate my weakness and then reapply the same process. By doing this, you will improve your weaknesses at an exponential rate. And this is the fastest way that you're going to improve and get better at really anything in life, by deliberately attacking your weaknesses. So, now, how do we actually find these weaknesses? If you can record your gameplay, it would help a lot, as you'll be able to look through and see where you're going wrong. But another great way to see your weakness is just by thinking about what's going wrong, and how could you do this better. Maybe with reactive tracking, you're over-flicking. But you heard in this video, you're supposed to deliberately under-flick just a little bit. So you start doing that, and your scores and your accuracy are getting higher, in turn, making your aim better. That's all I have for today, guys. If you made it to the end of this video, I hope that you've learned something new today that will benefit you in training your aim. This video took a lot of time to make, so if you guys could please leave a like or a comment, I would greatly appreciate that. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be responding to everybody. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you next time.